I'm Lloyd Holiday, and this is the Cost of a Thing podcast. Thanks for listening in today. The cost of a thing is the amount of time that you must spend working to buy the things that you want and need. And that directly determines your standard of living. And the American standard of living is what this podcast is all about. And I'm going to be discussing anything that affects that standard of living, especially those things that affect it negatively, and especially those things that have lowered our standard of living from the one that we had in America here in the 1960s, which was better than the one today. And why am I doing this? Because I don't see the government addressing these issues. I don't see the media addressing these issues. They've either forgotten them or ignored them. And these are some of the most important things that determine, of course, how we're going to live, how well we're going to live in the world today, especially for the young people. Okay, today I'm going to continue on with my top 10 super rip-offs that have reduced the American standard of living over the last 50 years or so. So what I'm going to be talking about in this podcast is how have corporations, U.S. corporations or the multinational corporations, lowered the standard of living in the United States for its workers over the past 50 years or so. And that's what this podcast is going to be about today. Okay, and now the first thing I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to get this out there right away, is profits. Corporate profits have gone up an astounding amount since the 1960s. In the 1960s, they averaged about $50 billion. The total corporation, the total profit for corporations, all added up in the 1960s during that time, average it out over the decade, about $50 billion per year. In 2018, the total corporate profit was close to $2,000 billion. That's $2 trillion. So it went up from $50 billion in the 60s to $2,000 billion in 2018 and the 2 or 3 years before that even. So that's the profits of corporations have gone up 40 times what they were in the 1960s. So they're making huge profits, record profits. And that is where the money is going in the United States right now. And during that time, during the last 50 years, from the 1960s to 2018, workers' wages have gone up maybe 5 or 6 times what they were due to inflation. And the general inflation rate maybe went up about 8 times. I think $1 in 1960 is now equivalent to it would take $8 to buy what $1 back then would buy. So it's about 8 times. So the profits have gone up 40 times, while inflation has only gone up 8 times, and the workers' wages only went up 5 or 6 times. So there you see where the money's going. And listen, I'm not against profits. I'm not against corporations making profits. But there's something going on where they're making too much profit. They're taking too much of the pie, of the economic pie. And they're not giving enough to the workers, and they're not, the consumer is not getting enough. The prices are so high, and the wages are so low, and the profits are so high. Now, what's supposed to keep profits in line is competition. So somehow the competition in many of these large industries has been either dumbed down or there's not much competition there. Maybe there's maybe the prices are being set behind the scenes. Who knows what's going on? But there's not a lot of competition in a lot of these industries, and that's why the prices are not staying lower, and the profits are much higher. And I'm not going to get into that today, but let's just say there's not enough competition in a lot of these industries today. Take the oil industry. All the gas stations are the same price. We see that, a few cents difference. There's nothing competitive going on there. Maybe even the automobile industry. There's not that much competition when it comes to pricing there either. Restaurants, there's a lot of competition. That's why the prices are relatively low for restaurants. But a lot of the big industries, not much competition. It's kind of a crony capitalism that's going on, and the prices are kind of preset, and there's not a lot of pressure to lower prices to get more market share by these corporations. And if you look at the industries that I've been talking about that are the super ripoffs, housing, medical industry, the college industry, might as well call that an industry too. I'd say there's little or no competition in any of those industries, and it's just a lot of price fixing, and I don't know if it's out and out collusion among the different builders and things like that, but certainly they're not lowering the price on these houses or on medical procedures, drugs, those kind of things due to competition. There is no competition in any of those industries, and that's why they are super rip-offs. So now I want to take a look and discuss a little bit about how have the corporate profits gone up so much, 40 times what they were in the 1960s, and how have they done that? Here's a few ways that they've done it, and some of it, we're just going to go down the list here. Okay, the first thing here is productivity increases, and that is a great thing. That means things can be made with less work, with less manpower, and that way they can be sold for less money, and that should increase the standard of living. But what happens is they get the productivity gains through new invention or ingenuity, better ways of making things, yet they don't pass that savings along to the consumer. They take it as profit. And that is a big way they've increased their profit. And productivity gains are a legitimate way to increase profits, but if there is real competition in the free market there, the prices should go down. They should not be able to hold the prices high when there's real competition, and there's not that competition there. They are taking all the productivity gains for themselves. That's just one way they've increased profits. And one statistic that's very powerful is that productivity has increased 4 times since the 1950s and 1960s. So you're looking at a worker today can produce 4 times what a worker in the 1950s could produce. Just one worker, due to the efficiencies and the new machines and ingenuity and all of that. And some of those gains should be passed along to the workers so they can raise their standard of living and everybody can have a better life. But what seems to have happened is, like I said, most of those gains, if not all of them, have been shunted off into profits for the corporation, increased profits. That's where the money's gone. Okay, another way corporations have increased their profits that led to the 40 times increase over the last 50 years has been through lobbying, corporate lobbying of the government, of the House of Representatives, of the Senate, of local lobbying and states, state legislatures, and of the presidents. The presidents get campaign funds from these corporations, and will sometimes do favors for them, just like all the other. There's a very big lobbying effort, and it has paid off big for the corporations, huge profit gains. some of the things they've gotten through their lobbying efforts have been deregulation, key deregulation, especially in the banking industries and Wall Street regulation and things like that. Things they couldn't even imagine. We're going to get into that later. I'm not going to get into all the deregulation, but that has made their profits go up a lot. Okay, another one is the so-called free trade deals. Free trade, they call it. We got all these trade deals with Mexico, China, many of the other countries, maybe Japan, Europe. Lots of free trade deals. And what the free trade deals have allowed the corporations to do is to move their manufacturing over the border into Mexico or China, take advantage of cheap labor, sometimes almost slave labor. There's no regulations over there, hardly. There's no environmental regulations. They can do pretty much whatever they want, so they get away from the regulations, and that helps their profits. Plus, the cheap labor gives them more profit also. I think the figure I've seen is like 7,000 factories have moved overseas with their manufacturing in just the last 20 years or so. And that's what that has really affected American workers and taken a lot of good jobs away from America and put them over there to these foreign countries. So that's one of the big things they've gotten from lobbying is these free trade deals, which really free trade means that the corporations are free to manufacture in, say, China or another country with very cheap labor, and then ship the product back to the United States and sell it to the consumers here in America for the same price as if it was made here in America, and then they keep the profit. So this has resulted in huge profit increases for the corporations. Also, another thing that they lobby for and have gotten is foreign workers. They bring in foreign engineers, software people, a lot of highly skilled people through these H-1B visa programs. And they bring those workers in from other countries, and that lowers the wages here in America. It keeps the wages down for the corporations. And of course, that helps their profits go higher and higher. And it hurts the workers here in America because they have to compete with cheap foreign labor right in their own backyard. So that's another way the corporations have really increased their profits through their lobbying efforts. And likewise, they lobby for the government not to crack down on illegal aliens, which is another way corporations and businesses get cheap labor from the illegal aliens that come in. They hire them for very low wages, and that also drives down the wages of American workers, maybe this time on the low end of the pay scale, and puts a lot of them Americans out of work. And if they do get a job, it keeps the wages low. It keeps the supply of workers high, of unskilled labor, and keeps the wages for those people very low. And that benefits the corporations. It also creates more profit for them, again. And corporations and business love illegal aliens, and that's one of the reasons why this, there's probably 10 or 12 million or more of them in the United States right now. Well, I'm not going to go into that today, but that's another thing that business has lobbied for that is to their benefit. And another thing they lobby for, of course, are bailouts and sweetheart deals with the government, so they keep their can keep their stock prices high, so they can borrow money very cheaply. They lobby for low interest rates. They lobby for easy money. They lobby for easy money from the Federal Reserve, so they can borrow cheaply. And then that helps their profits, and it helps their stock prices, especially. We're going to get into that later. I'm just going to hit on that lightly. But the government, the Federal Reserve, has been propping stock prices. And that helps their profits too, because they own a lot of the stock in their own companies. and they've been buying back their own stock. So if that price goes up, that's more profit to them. Okay, now those are some of the things that were done to increase corporate profits. Now another thing that's been done, and it has nothing to do with productivity gains or lobbying the government for more favorable conditions for corporations to do business. They've gotten more profit. They got all of that, and they wanted more. So what did they do? They took from the worker. They took their wages. They lowered their wages. They lowered their benefits. There's no pension. There's no defined benefit pensions anymore, or very few. It went from something like 50% of corporations having defined benefit pensions for old age to now I think it's below 10% or something like that. I'll have to get that number, but I'll talk about that. We're going to talk about pensions in a future podcast, but just know hardly anybody's getting a defined benefit pension anymore, which means a defined benefit pension just means you get a certain amount of money for your entire life after you retire per month. That's a defined. That means it's defined. So they've cut all this stuff for workers. So that all of that has added up and gone into the corporate profit. They took it from the worker. Part of it came from the worker. They're getting, like I said, lower wages. The wages for a male in the 1970s was actually higher than it is today in 2018 on average. So they're making less when you consider inflation. They're making less money now than they did in the 1970s. So where are they getting the money? Who's getting all that money? The corporations are taking it. And as far as benefits, other benefits other than pensions, which they've cut down to almost nothing, medical benefits. They used to pay, the corporations used to pay all of the medical benefits. A good corporation would pay all of it. Now they put a lot of that burden on the employee. That comes out of their paycheck, a good portion of it. And then there's large deductibles for medical insurance, and there's large copays. So it's not really even insurance anymore. It's more of a catastrophic insurance now. So that's another reduction in standard of living for the workers. So what do you got? Lower wages, lower benefits, no pensions. That's how the corporations have lowered the standard of living for Americans by taking it for profit. They're taking all of that for profit and the other stuff. They're not passing the productivity gains on to the workers and the consumers. They're taking it all for themselves, and then they turned around and said, let's take even more. Let's lower their salaries. They're making too much money. So that's what they did, and this is what's been going on. And this is the corporate ripoff. This is the corporate ripoff, the corporation ripoff. And it's going on right now. And you can see the battles happening as I speak here every day in Congress. In the past, there used to be in corporations, if you worked a long time, you would get something called seniority. That meant you wouldn't be one of the first to be laid off if something happened. You were there for 10 or 15 years. You had a good long track record. The company would reward you with seniority and higher pay for experience and years worked. A lot of that's gone over the side too. There's not a lot of loyalty. There's a lot of threats of layoffs. That's another thing that hangs over the head of most Americans. There's always threats of firings and layoffs going on. And you're just lucky, you're just lucky to have this job. There's no loyalty to the workers, and therefore there's not a lot of loyalty to that company from the workers either. I don't think this is good for the whole system. It's kind of a dog-eat-dog cutthroat type situation. A lot of scare tactics. I don't know, the corporations might think, hey, if we scare them that they might lose their job, maybe they'll work harder for us, or there might be some psychological profile they're using there. And And anyway, that's the main things that I have. There's probably a lot more that I didn't think of or that I didn't look into yet, but I'm going to go into more of that in the future. But just know there's a big corporation ripoff happening. It's been happening. They've been tightening the screws over 50 years, and finally they've got kind of things the way they want them, and they've got huge profits coming in. And the standard of living of Americans, is down. And yes, the loyalty for the corporation by the workers is probably pretty low right now. There's probably a pretty low loyalty level there with all the threats of layoffs, and the people see their friends getting laid off, and constantly they're under threat of that. And from what I'm hearing, some of the corporations are arrogant about this and very authoritative. I guess they feel like they've got all the chips in their favor now, and they can get away with just about anything, any treatment, poor treatment of the employees. And in some cases, there's almost a mean-spiritedness, or even to the level of cruelty in some of the cases I hear about. And I don't think that's good for any of us in America, including the employers. You want a good relationship between employers and employees so that people do their best and they work hard, and they want to work hard for that corporation so that there's a very good outcome for the products that are made or the services that are given. Okay, that's about all I'm going to go into today. I don't want to keep these things from getting I want to keep them from getting too long. I want to keep them down a little bit shorter and more manageable. So that's the number 6 top of my top 10 super ripoffs that have lowered the American standard of living over the last 50 years. And I'm going to do the next 7, 8, 9, and 10 coming out here. I should have those in the next 3 or 4 weeks. And then that'll complete my top 10. And then I'll start going into some other rip-offs and other issues. Thank you for listening in today. And until next time, this is Lloyd Holiday signing off.